Coming up, the weekly number crunch on COVID-19 Delta in New South Wales. The good news here, the science, the data, the numbers, they tell me this is all going to be well over by December. The bad news is it's going to get even more interesting for the next several weeks. Details next. Up front, okay, if you've never heard of me or seen me before, I am an engineer, not an epidemiologist or a virologist, and I make no claims whatsoever to be an expert in those fields. What I know about is modelling systems, okay? Mathematical models projecting the behaviour of systems. And when you think about it, everything's a system. Money in a bank account earning interest, like that's a system. Yeast in a tank brewing beer, or even the mass flow rates of air and fuel that go into engines and produce power or thrust. They're all numbers. COVID-19 Delta spearing itself through New South Wales is a pretty simple mathematical system to model, at least at a basic level. And I'm sure we could argue endlessly about the granular detail, but to get a basic overview of this and what's actually happening, all you need is a Google spreadsheet, some basic numeracy, and a couple of hours of thought and calculation. We have 7 weeks of public data on the new cases, the amount of testing, and all those kinds of things. We've got a fixed population of 8.2 million people who are all currently living under a variety of fairly novel constraints, the imperfect intent of which is to minimise transmission by limiting unnecessary human contact. We've got vaccines being rolled out, and that's pretty much it. Politicians are, of course, managing this, so it's roughly as efficient and easy to understand as anything being run by the former Soviet bureaucracy. Politicians are, of course, almost to a fault, dipshits, and on both sides. I need to emphasise that this is an apolitical presentation. They're all hopeless. The left and the right are equally magnetic when it comes to useless arsehole gravy train riders, such as the bin chicken and Braz and health hazard and Gladys's upcoming replacement, Parrot Head. What could possibly go wrong with fine, upstanding arseholes such as these in charge? Look at them. A quick shout out to Health Hazard for not even being enough of a man to own an apology to the fine and often forgotten people of Wilcannia after negligently misrepresenting their conduct so publicly. He could not even stand in front of a frigging camera and issue a heartfelt apology. I would not, therefore, blame anyone for concluding on this basis that he's a shallow, pompous, cockhead coward. Personal opinion. It's the view I formed over that incident, incidentally. I love your work, dude. So friggin' consistent. It's hard to understand the pandemic of political incompetence being inflicted on society in this crisis and eroding our civil liberties and our confidence in authority, but it's very easy to model and project the trajectory of COVID. Let's take a look. If you've watched any of these reports before, you'll know that about 3 weeks ago, I built my first New South Wales COVID new case model, okay? And obviously since then, we've had 3 more weeks of data and the numbers have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And therefore we've got, in a sense, better data. So it's time to update the model. And in this case, I built a better mousetrap, so bigger spring and better cheese holder. And I got some fresher cheese, which is, twice the cheesy goodness, plus you don't get fat if you overdose on it, kind of thing, right? And it prevents tooth decay. So, hey, what's not to like? Anyway, I started on the 28th of June, which is roughly coincides with when this whole lockdown situation kicked off. And the latest data I got was yesterday's data, which is Saturday the 4th of September. And I'm taking the week ending being every Saturday, like the end of the calendar week, okay? What I did then to build a better model than the one I had before was I took a rolling 7-day average of the daily new cases. And the benefit of doing that, right, is that it takes into account fluctuations that might naturally occur, such as a reduction in testing or demand for testing, if such a thing exists, on a Saturday or a Sunday, influencing the cases that are detected subsequently relating to those lower testing numbers, or even if there's more tests on Monday, because for many workers in those most affected suburbs that they need testing on Monday in order to go to work, kind of thing. Okay, so rolling 7-day average. And once you do that, the interesting thing there is I did that on a daily basis, and all the noise just disappears from the data, and you get this steady incremental growth. Basically, you can do this for yourself. The data is available from New South Wales Health. You can just look at their Twitter feed, really, if you want the most recent 4 weeks or thereabouts of data. So anyway, once I got this 7-day average, what I did then was I derived a daily average growth rate. Okay, so what was the growth rate like interest in a bank? Did Wednesday grow by 4% or 4.3 or 5.2 or 8.9? What was it relative to Tuesday based on this rolling average? And then what I did was I took those 7 days of average daily growth rates, and I averaged each 7-day growth rate, and I came up with a daily average growth rate for the week. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And then I also dismissed anything before the 10th of July because it just looked a bit dodgy to me, like it was unreliable. And often you get that when systems are kicking off and they haven't really reached some point of growth equilibrium or anything like that. And then I just had a look at what have we got, because what we've got allows us to predict the future. So basically I've got this whole big spreadsheet with lots more numbers in it, but these are the salient facts. Okay, this is the week ending the 24th of July, 31st to 7th, every week up until yesterday, Saturday the 4th of September. And this is that growth rate that I talked about. It's the average growth rate for that week. Okay, and often what I found was we'd have two small ones with a big one in the middle. We've got a couple of relatively small ones there with a big one in the middle as well. Okay, so I don't know what drives that. It could just be completely random. But I had a careful look at all of this stuff, and then you've got to guess a little bit. There's like an element of informed guessing with any of this modelling, and anyone who models anything for a living will tell you that, yeah, you've got to guess it, and the guess has to be informed by the data, but you could guess higher or lower as well. Okay, so I thought about this for some time, and what seemed to me to be the best fit for most of this data was a growth rate of about 5.7%. That just seemed to be doing the best job to me based on a few different options that I tried for best fitting it, and 5.7% it is. And this is just like a bank account, okay? If you put money in a bank account and it grows by 5.7% per day, that's what's been going on with COVID. That's the growth in new cases per day. And it particularly fits the last few weeks, the past few weeks. I hope they're not the last few weeks. I hope sincerely that's not the case. But the past few weeks, this seems to fit. This 5.7% seems to fit in here pretty sweetly, okay? The average new cases, if you care to remember, way back towards the end of July, it was, in the early hundreds and then the late hundreds, and then we cracked the 200 barrier in the first week of August, at the end of the first week, and then you can see that essentially every 2 weeks we're kind of doubling or thereabouts. That's how it seems to me anyway. So we don't always do that. Sometimes there's a bit of fluctuation, but if you wanted to ballpark it, that's kind of what we're looking at. And the testing numbers, I drew a bit of a blank finding these. You could go back and look at the COVID surveillance reports, but over the past 3 weeks that we have good data for, easily accessible on Twitter, 900,000, 1.2 million, 980,000. There were more cases detected, obviously, but it doesn't seem to be disproportionately more as a result of carrying out 33-ish% more tests. It seems completely in line. So this is not a case, this 895, is not a case of we went out harder and did more testing and found more of what we were looking for. This indicates to me that the tests reflect, what's happening out there a little bit. And I don't know what relationship there is between identified new cases and cases out there in the community. I suspect it's substantially higher out in the community because obviously you cannot find every case, and some people will be disinclined to prevent themselves, some people will be asymptomatic, there'll be all of that kind of thing going on out there, people with the disease who have not been identified. But anyway, models are not just curiosities, because the model of everything is designed to help you predict the future, because most of us want some certainty, or at least a higher level of certainty about what next, right? And every model that you use, even if it's a very well understood model, like the theory of gravity, for example, you can predict how fast something is going to impact the ground. Right? There are some variables, like the equations that you learn in school don't tell you about aerodynamic drag. So if you drop a feather, it doesn't fall quite as fast as a brick if you drop it off the balcony railing or something, right? But gravity is very well understood. It allows us to predict the future. All scientific theories, which are not hypotheses, they're theories, okay? They allow you to predict the future. This is not a theory. This is a model based on data, and there are discontiguities in the data, but they show us a window into what the future might be. So let's look at that. So the rolling average, okay, for the week that has just ended on the 4th of September, Saturday just gone, 1,291 cases per day. Now, I know the Premier did point to individual case numbers much higher than that. This is an average across 7 days. There were some lower ones as well. It's the average, okay? And if you grow that average, that daily average, at 5.7%, it's going to double in the middle of the month. That's just how this rolls, okay? And then on the 1st of October, the daily new cases should be at about 5.8 thousand. All right, now that is a big number, but it is completely in line with the growth we've seen before. And then if you go forward another month, the same sort of growth yields an even bigger number, like 32,000. But somewhere in here, pretty clearly, and I only put these numbers in here not to scare you, okay, but for relevance, this is how the model rolls, and what we've got to decide is, when do we drop it and leave it behind? And I'd suspect that we're going to drop it sometime, certainly sometime after the 1st of November. It just has to be dropped because we're going to run out of testing capacity. Can't identify that many cases. People won't be coming forward if they've got it, sort of thing, if they're healthy enough. And the virus is going to run out of tasty new candidates somewhere in this window as well, right? And the other thing is, the really important thing that's happening here is lockdown is as hard as it can be in practice. There can't be any greater level of lockdown without essentially shutting society and saying opens after Christmas kind of thing, right? And we can't do that in society. The lockdown is what it is. It's not going to get any harder. What we're basically going to see is the vaccination rate and what effect that has. And like, if you get vaccinated today for the first time, then you can't get vaccinated for a couple of weeks for your second shot. And then it might take, I guess, by all accounts, a couple of weeks for that second shot to take full effect and give you the best immunity you can have, all right? So there is a latency factor with vaccination, but make no mistake, this is a race. What they're all in at the moment is a race. It's a race between this geometric progression, which will continue unless we do something else. And the only something else that appears to be on the table is vaccination. Okay, so it's really virus versus vaccine here, playing out in society, and the arena in which it's going to be most apparently played out is, how does the health system cope? Does it cope or does it crumble? And that's why there's so many official messages, I think, about getting you to get vaccinated now if you are not, and getting you to get your second shot if you've only had your first one, because this is kind of the domain of nightmare hellscape. And certainly we get to some number in this window and the health system cannot cope with the number of seriously ill people. And there'll be blame and heartache and all of that kind of thing, but the reality is that's for afterwards. And what's for now is the deployment of countermeasures, and the only one is vaccination. So, you know, at about by the 1st of October, you got to get as vaccinated, everyone's got to get as vaccinated as they can be, because these numbers start to get really big really fast. And obviously the virus will run out of new candidates somewhere in here, but we can make a big difference potentially to what happens to the model in this number if we reduce the pathways to infection by getting as many people vaccinated as possible. And really, that's the only mission. If you are already refraining from all of that unnecessary interpersonal contact, which obviously is a countermeasure against the virus, but down here, the only real countermeasure against these numbers getting substantially big and nightmare hellscape on the healthcare front, the only countermeasure is vaccination. The mainstream news media is, of course, overwhelmingly a fellatio on-demand service for the coalition. Rupert Murdoch's News Limited, which is also Sky News, and those after-dark geniuses, the pundits. And Nine Entertainment, which also owns Fairfax and Macquarie Radio, let's not forget, with former Howard government Federal Treasurer Peter Costello at the helm. Unlikely to be an impartial outfit, I'd suggest. And Seven West Media, Kerry Stokes' cesspit, all slightly left-leaning compared with, say, Mussolini. So it is kind of easy for Osama bin Chicken, the Premier of Afghanistan, to hit these softballs out of the park like continuously all day long from 11 a.m. And on the 19th of August, she did just that. Ms. Bin Chicken, OBC herself, she stood in front of her right-wing free press fluffers, right? And she promised, if that's the right word, prick-teased is probably more accurate. Anyway, the offer on the table to all of us was exciting but non-specific, quote, things to look forward to when she, quote, introduces freedoms. Yes, for vaccinated people, once vaccination targets were met, okay? And that's exactly how those useless dipshits at The Guardian regurgitated it. Like, cut and paste, dudes, come on. Journalism 101, right? Ms. Berejiklian is not introducing freedoms. We should always have freedoms. It's part of the deal, living in this society. At best, she's planning to give us this sort of low-fat, zero-sugar version of freedoms, which our society has always had, but she's actually removing restrictions, okay? And these concepts, giving freedoms versus removing restrictions, they're vastly different things, and they should be if you're a reporter. You should get that. Anyway, I do not think history will remember the bin chicken as bestower of freedoms. These freedoms actually turned out to be allowing 5 people at a wedding or 10 people at a funeral, and 5 fully vaccinated people can have a fucking picnic after the 17th of September. Yes. The health system and the ambulance service are collapsing today, right? And we are promising people picnics. Spare me this bullshit, right? The freedoms I want are the freedom to travel anywhere without being required to have a lawful reason, without having to identify myself to the police on a whim. I want to be able to go and see my aging parents, okay? I want to be able to associate with whomever the fuck I want, just like the olden days. And if you've been stuck in a cramped apartment with 8 other people with whom you live and allowed out for only 1 hour a day, you would understandably have had a gutful of these bullshit out-of-touch promises. At least I have a yard and no time limit on getting outside and doing a bit of exercise. So I'm hardly one of the hardest hit people, and hey, here's my work environment. It's 4.5 metres down from the lounge room, you know. The restoration of full freedoms across society and all previous civil liberties never gets a mention at 11 a.m. Freedom is not a gift that these asshole politicians are entitled to bestow upon you or me. It is an inalienable right, and it needs to be restored as soon as possible in full, with no terms and conditions. And while we're addressing this, these idiots cannot even get the fundamental details of simple restrictions right. For example, you are not presently allowed to travel more than 5 kilometres from your home if you cross a council border, for example, to go shopping. But how is that 5Ks defined? Have you ever thought about that? Like, is it by road or is it as the crow flies? Deafening silence from the regulators and senior politicians on this. It makes a hell of a big difference when the maximum penalty for breaching a public health order is $11,000 and or 6 months in prison. How does an average person even know exactly where the local government area boundary is, or how that distance is defined, and how can they measure it? Especially if it's as the crow flies, because it's harder to get that out of Google or your GPS, isn't it? Similarly, Ms. Bin Chicken tells us we must wear a mask when, quote, outside. Leaving to one side the fact that this is an entirely ineffective COVID prophylactic. Like, how is outside actually defined? Is it outside the front door or outside the boundary of your property? And on this, I'm hearing crickets also. Kind of important given the penalty on the table. Now, these ridiculous fucking picnics that the Premier wants you to thank her for, this gift of freedom from her to you. Please. A, nobody gives a shit about picnics. Nobody I've ever spoken to has been having picnic withdrawals. Nobody I know has ever jonesed for a fucking picnic. So that's not like completely out of touch with every voter ever, is it? Some people I know would rather see the curfew they live under lifted in case of a random booty call from, let's say, known associate at 10 p.m. or something. Other people I know, and there is considerable overlap here, they might just want to plonk themselves down in a restaurant or at a pub, just like in the olden days. And I ask you, what is wrong with letting these places reopen if the staff there is fully vaxxed and the patrons are too? Vaccines work, so why not make them work for our freedom, like starting today? B, on picnics, these hypothetical picnickers, okay, they have to be fully vaccinated. Okay, they have to be able to prove that they are fully vaccinated, presumably when the fixated picnic unit raids them after some complaint from Bruz that somebody has told a joke about him at a picnic at Rushcutters Bay or something, and now he's upset and feeling vulnerable because that's really, really important to him. Riddle me this on picnics, okay? Who is responsible for the vaccination status of those 5 picnicking nuts with their blanket? Let us say, hypothetically, that you hook up with 4 of your best mates for a picnic. It's Muzz and Spanner and Snot and Biff and you all trot down for a picnic, which is not like vaguely village people at all, is it? You throw down a tartan rug at a park under an old oak tree, you pour each other a plastic tumbler of iced tea. Snot unwraps some of those little triangle-shaped cucumber sandwiches with the crusts cut off. You braid each other's hair and you sing Kumbaya. Sounds great, doesn't it? Like, where do we sign up for that? Then Biff tells Muzz a joke about Bruz. You know, something like, did you hear that Bruz snorted curry powder by mistake last night? The paramedics had to put him in a medically induced coma. Now he's got a bad ticker. Yuck, yuck, yuck. And then Spanner retorts, well, I heard that Bruz hired a new European cleaner. It took her 15 hours just to hoover the mansion. It turns out she was a Slovak. Then, of course, the fixated persons unit pounces, and you're all sort of flex-cuffed and face down entertainingly, while Afghanistan's finest checks Yovax. And it turns out that Biff has misrepresented his vaccination status to the rest of you. He's an in-closet anti-vaxxer. Bastard. Who gets fined in this situation? for unlawful picnicking? Is it just the anti-vaxxed or the cohorts as well? Will you be charged potentially as an accessory to unvaxxed picnicking? And are you conceivably therefore responsible to the authorities for the vaccination status of those with whom you associate in the People's Free Republic of post-COVID Afghanistan? Riddle me all of that. I mean, this is what policy on the fly looks like. And I am satirising it because we could all use perhaps a smile currently. But the underlying message is pretty serious, right? With 11 grand on the table and 6 months in the slammer, like, please. Bin Chicken alluded to these brave new freedoms and those picnic promises on August the 18th. That's when the alluding took place, right? New cases on that day, 633. Fast forward only about a fortnight, Saturday the 14th of September, a new record of 1,533 new COVID Delta cases. The rhetoric there abruptly changed to people will die when the state reopens, which is a pretty stark message, isn't it? And this tells me that the intellectually dishonest agenda Gladys Berejiklian and her spin doctors have been pursuing, personal opinion, is to use the restrictions to give the botched vaccine rollout, thanks a lot ScoMo, sufficient time to gain traction, because this is a race. She has in fact been buying time. There's nothing wrong with that, but it seems to me New South Wales Health and the Premier have known for weeks that the genie of the Delta variant was coming out of the bottle, irrespective. And the agenda was to slow things down so that the health system did not become quickly overwhelmed and collapse. It's pretty serious, okay? It's unclear to me why it's not possible for any politician, seemingly, to have an intellectually honest conversation with the electorate concerning this most important of issues at this critical time, especially as the opportunity to do so presents itself to her every day at 11 a.m. Like, she can't say I didn't have a chance to get around to it. Just get the people to buy into the real serious reason for these countermeasures, because this is a dangerous situation for society. And it's not just COVID. I mean, I would not want to fall off a ladder and fracture my skull or be in a serious car crash or something of that nature when the state's health system's critical care units are at breaking point. It seems to me the state's health system is on the brink right now. And I'm saying this because on Thursday of last week, the Australian Medical Association called on the government to release its hospital capacity modelling. And you've got to ask yourself why that's literally a state secret and why not even the AMA has security clearance, apparently, to receive that information. Like, would you not want the doctors on board for what's coming? However, the New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard shot down suggestions the state's healthcare system was on its knees, insisting the system could share the burden between different hospitals. Hazzard also hit out at keyboard warriors who he claimed had been providing irresponsible healthcare advice online. Well, presumably that's because irresponsible health advice is his job. Making specific reference there to the advice, if that's the right word, which he gave the public recently concerning the conduct of the people in Wilcannia, which is inexcusable, personal opinion. That quote from The Guardian there last Thursday. One thing about this is certain, however. We are absolutely all going to know about the capacity of the health system sometime over the next 8 weeks, because politicians might lie, but the mathematics of the model does not. Either the health system will cope or it will fail. And it seems to me that the Premier and/or the New South Wales Health Department have been cooking the books on the actual number of COVID hospitalisations, which according to the Saturday paper, which broke the story, and also Pedestrian TV and Seven, which picked it up, actual hospitalisations are 3 times higher than the bin chicken has been claiming every day at 11 a.m. The rate of COVID-19 hospitalisations in New South Wales is being reported at 1/3 of the real figure, with the actual numbers being masked by a decision to only report those who end up in medical facilities and not the thousands receiving care under the state's hospital in the home arrangements. The real figure, according to the Saturday paper, is 3 times higher than that which the Premier has been reporting. This figure, they say, is according to Garvan Institute of Medical Research Executive Director Professor Christopher Goodnow, and a briefing provided to National Cabinet. It means hospitalisations are actually more like 15% of COVID cases rather than the 5.5% reported by the bin chicken. These hospital-in-the-home people are receiving hospital-grade support in their homes, like oxygen, and they get monitoring by hospital staff. It really does erode confidence when the only 2 explanations I can see for the disparity in these numbers is either the intent to deceive or just incompetence. Like, if there's a third alternative, just let me know in the comments, okay? But I'm not seeing it. If we just didn't know, then that's profoundly incompetent. And if we knew but we talked it down, then that's just intellectually dishonest. Like, what else is there? I'll give you a link to the Saturday paper's in-depth report on this in the description, so you can check it out for yourself. It is well worth a look. Other credible sources, such as Dr. Anthony Holly, the president of the Australian and New Zealand Intensive Care Society, and Brett Simpson from the Australian Paramedics Association, quoted in the story, they paint a grim picture of clinical care already being compromised and the ambulance system, frankly, already not coping. With cases currently doubling roughly once every 2 weeks or so, because unlike politicians, the numbers on this do not lie, we will see just how well these arsehole politicians have spent the last 12 months, which they've had to prepare for this crisis. Do you suppose they've invested the time and, of course, your tax dollars wisely, or have they just squandered it? Next month will certainly tell. The next month, the next 4 weeks, in other words. Currently, 698 of the state's 855 staffed intensive care beds are occupied. Not all by COVID cases, but that's the occupancy rate of intensive care in New South Wales. And new COVID-19 Delta cases seem certain to double from today on or about between the 16th and the 20th of the month. Now, before I let you go, I want to address what for me is one of the most frustrating and upsetting aspects of the pandemic. And you might not have picked it. It's the power of the internet to weaponise people's confirmation biases and literally fracture the epistemology of reality. I am, of course, talking about the anti-vax movement, which has considerable traction right now. And the fact is, you don't get to have an opinion about vaccines any more than you get to have an opinion about gravity or the size of the Earth or the composition of the atmosphere or the location of the sun or the height of Everest. There are simply not 2 sides to every story. Like with vaccines and so many other things, there is only one side. Vaccines work. The evidence is clear and absolutely unequivocal. I've done 3 previous reports on COVID in New South Wales, and the anti-vax comments have been prolific indeed. These people, they tend to hide behind fake names, they tend to be uneducated, or at least that's how they appear to me, and they have very definite views which are not amenable to new information. They seem mistakenly to think that research and going out and looking for websites that support one's nutbag hypotheses are one and the same thing. And like, dude, they're really not. Here's an example from Timbo Tango. Why do think the first mRNA vaccines the world has ever seen are going to have no faults? NRMA is not in the old vaccine category. It is completely new territory in that it uses a synthesized spike protein wrapped up in lipid nanoparticles. This then enters the cell and forces the cell to react in a certain way rather than the old way of vaccinating by introducing a weakened sample of the actual virus and let the cells do the work. Surely you can see the danger in this experiment technology. If I learned anything from Timbo's fine missive, it is that there really should be a means test for keyboard usage. Imagine if you had to front up to Service New South Wales or some organisation of that nature and pass an actual test before you were allowed to drive a keyboard. Things would improve. Anyway, in my view, the proliferation of bullshit of this nature is funny in isolation, but altogether it is entirely unhelpful and potentially very dangerous for society because the biggest countermeasure is the vaccine. That's all we've got, right? It's the biggest variable in how this is going to play. So if you join Club Anti-Vax, you are really not helping. Now, for starters, Timbo's assertion is pretty clearly exactly not how mRNA vaccines work. And for the record, it means messenger RNA. According to the World Health Organization on its COVID-19 vaccines safety page, question, are mRNA vaccines safe? If they're based on new technology, how can we be sure? The COVID-19 mRNA vaccine technology has been rigorously assessed for safety, and clinical trials have shown that mRNA vaccines produce an immune response that has high efficacy against disease. mRNA vaccine technology has been studied for several decades, including in the context of Zika, rabies, and influenza vaccines. mRNA vaccines are not live virus vaccines and do not interfere with human DNA. I guess we've all got to do informational triage these days and decide what's credible and what's not. Should we trust the WHO or Timbo Tango and a cohort of like-minded anti-vax nuts who are happy to espouse their, let's call it, perspective to anyone who cares to listen? I will link to the World Health Organization's COVID vaccine Q&A in the description. Now, this excerpt from a lengthy vaccine proclamation by Steve, the Daily Shaver. Now, what's the effect of these new mRNA vaxxers over time? God knows. Well, thank you very much for a lengthy comment there, Steve, orbiting the vaccination issue. And if you don't mind, I'm going to decline to inflict most of it upon the audience. And do say hi to your mum, Mrs. Daily Shaver. I do hope she was popular. Reuters has fact-checked several nutbag anti-vax claims of this nature and others, and I will link to 3 of Reuters' best responses there, which reference some of the world's leading medical experts. According to Dr. Daniel Karitsky, the Chief of Infectious Diseases at Brigham and Women's Hospital, one of the world's top teaching hospitals and also part of Harvard Medical School, mRNA vaccines contain only instructions for making spike protein and are incapable of generating virus particles, so nothing can be shed. Reuters goes on to explain. Karitsky's also pointed out that the mRNA vaccines are degraded within 24 to 48 hours. That means they disappear from the shot recipients' bodies within a day or two. It cannot disseminate to other tissues or be shed. Moving to Sam Harris now, one of the world's leading independent intellectuals and host of the insanely popular Making Sense podcast. In the July 23 episode of Making Sense, Mr. Harris interviewed Dr. Eric Topol, founder and director of the Scripps Research Translational Institute. Dr. Topol is a professor of molecular medicine, author of over 1,200 peer-reviewed papers, recipient of 290,000 citations, inductee to the US National Academy of Medicine, and one of the top 10 most cited medical researchers ever. Dr. Topol's specific research interest is gene-based tools and digital tools to individualise medicine. That episode of Making Sense, and you have to be a paid subscriber, but I can tell you it's definitely worth it, is essentially the definitive guide to vaccine hesitancy and why such an attitude is in fact indefensible. According to Dr. Topol, there has never been a vaccine with long-term health effects. Most of the negative claims made about vaccines are just outright uninformed rubbish. I fear, however, that this will be insufficient to turn the tide of nutbag viewpoint around. I suppose ultimately that anti-vaxxing is a form of Darwinism, and in that sense, over time, anti-vaxxing just might be its own reward. Do what you can, okay, to help the frontline healthcare workers in New South Wales over the next 4 to 6 weeks, because that is really going to be crunch time. The numbers do not lie. Something's going to happen, and I'm hoping for the best result. Minimise your interpersonal interactions, and if you are not already, get yourself vaxxed.